Have you ever noticed how humanity's greatest catastrophes rarely begin with dramatic explosions or monumental decisions? They emerge silently, almost imperceptibly, through something far more insidious and seemingly harmless, a small lie. Perhaps you yourself have felt that strange sensation that something fundamental has been lost in our world, a feeling that we are navigating through an increasingly artificial reality where truth has become a luxury that few can afford to seek. You wake up in the morning, check your phone, consume hundreds of pieces of information in just a few minutes, and a quiet voice in your mind whispers, "Is any of this real? Am I living my own life? Or simply responding to carefully orchestrated stimuli?" This uneasiness you feel is not paranoia or excessive pessimism. It is your most primitive and wise intuition, recognizing that we are living in the midst of the greatest reality engineering experiment ever conducted in human history, and it all began with a lie so small that we barely noticed when it was planted. The story I need to share with you today is not about elaborate conspiracies or secret plans for world domination. It is about something much more subtle and, for that very reason, much more dangerous. How humanity learned to lie to itself so sophisticatedly that we lost the ability to distinguish between what is construction and what is discovery, between what we create and what we find. Imagine for a moment the first person who decided to tell a small lie about something seemingly insignificant. Perhaps it was a merchant 5,000 years ago who slightly exaggerated the purity of his gold, or a scribe who minimally altered a record to favor his employer. That specific lie did not cause the end of the world, but it planted a seed that would grow for millennia until it became the most destructive force our species has ever known. The ability to construct entirely fictional realities that become more convincing than reality itself. To understand how we reached the point where we live today, we need to return to the exact moment when our species crossed an invisible but irreversible line. It was when we discovered that the stories we tell about ourselves can be more powerful than the facts about ourselves. For hundreds of thousands of years, human beings lived in small groups where survival depended on accurate information about the environment: where to find water, which plants were poisonous, how to predict climate changes. Lying in this context was literally lethal. But as we developed more complex societies, we discovered something extraordinary. Certain lies, when collectively accepted, could create functional realities. The concept of money is a consensual lie that enables mass cooperation. The idea of nations is a shared fiction that organizes billions of people. Religions are imagined narratives that give meaning to suffering and death. The problem was not in the lies themselves, but in what happened when we stopped recognizing them as human constructions and began treating them as absolute discoveries about the nature of reality. When a society forgets that its most sacred truths are human creations, it loses the ability to question them, modify them, or abandon them when they become dysfunctional. And that is exactly what happened to us. We began to worship our own creations as if they were immutable natural laws. And that was the small lie that planted the seeds of our current collapse. The illusion that our mental constructions are objective discoveries about how the world really works. The first major symptom of this process appeared when we developed economic systems based on the premise that infinite growth is possible on a finite planet. This was not just a lie about mathematics or physics. It was a lie about the very nature of reality. But we told it with such conviction, wrapped it in such sophisticated language, supported it with such complex models, that we forgot it was a human construction and not a natural law. Entire generations of economists, politicians, and business leaders grew up genuinely believing that this lie was truth and built all their decisions upon it. The result was a system that consumes the planet exponentially while proclaiming that this is not only inevitable, but desirable. The second major manifestation was our relationship with technology. We created machines to serve us, but then invented the story that technological progress is an autonomous force that we must passively accept. We developed algorithms to organize information, but then accepted the fiction that these algorithms are neutral and objective, when in truth, they are loaded with all the biases, limitations, and objectives of those who created them. We built social networks to connect people, but then embraced the lie that business models based on addiction and psychological manipulation are the inevitable price of connectivity. At each step, we forgot that we were the creators of these technologies and began to behave as if they were natural forces to which we must adapt. The third manifestation was even more subtle, our relationship with information. For most of human history, access to information was limited, and this created a natural scarcity that gave value to knowledge. But when we developed the capacity to produce and distribute information virtually, without limit, something unexpected happened. Instead of becoming wiser, we became more confused. Instead of having access to truth, we created an environment where all versions of truth compete for the same mental space, and the one that wins is not necessarily the most accurate, but the most attractive, the most confirming of our existing prejudices, the most capable of generating emotional engagement. At this point in our conversation, I need to pause and ask you something directly. When was the last time you were absolutely certain about something important? When was the last time you knew, without a shadow of doubt, that significant information was completely true? If you stopped to think and realized that this sensation of certainty has become increasingly rare in your life, you are not alone in this experience. Many of us carry a silent anxiety about living in a world where we can no longer clearly distinguish between truth and fiction, between reality and construction, between facts and narratives. If this resonates with you, share in the comments. I feel uncertainty about reality when. Your honesty can help others realize that we are not alone in this sensation of existential drift that characterizes our times. What makes our current situation particularly dangerous is not that we are living with lies, something humanity has always done, but that we have developed technologies capable of making these lies indistinguishable from reality. Artificial intelligence can now create texts, images, videos, and audio that are impossible to distinguish from authentic material. We can simulate anyone saying anything so convincingly that even experts cannot detect the fabrication. This means we are entering an era where the distinction between true and false becomes technically irrelevant because both can be produced with the same quality and distributed at the same speed. But the real collapse is not in the technologies themselves. It is in how our human mind responds to this environment. Our brain evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in contexts where false information was rare and easily detectable. We do not have natural mechanisms to process a constant flow of information that may or may not be real, created by people who may or may not exist, with objectives that may or may not be aligned with our well-being. The result is chronic cognitive overload that forces us to take increasingly primitive mental shortcuts. We begin to believe information not because it is true, but because it is comfortable. Not because it is accurate, but because it confirms what we already thought. Not because it makes us wiser, but because it makes us feel better about our existing choices. This is the small lie that is causing our collapse. The belief that we can navigate this new information environment using the same mental mechanisms we used when information was scarce and verifiable. We continue pretending that our intuition about truth and falsehood still works, when in reality it has been completely overwhelmed by the sophistication of informational manipulation techniques. We continue pretending that we can distinguish between reliable and unreliable sources, when in reality the tools for simulating reliability have become so advanced that this distinction has lost practical meaning. The collapse we are experiencing is not just economic, political, or environmental. It is an epistemological collapse. We are losing our collective ability to distinguish between what we know and what we think we know, between what is real and what is constructed to appear real. When a civilization loses this capacity, it can no longer make rational decisions about its future because it can no longer correctly assess its present situation. It is like trying to navigate a ship when all the instruments show different information and there is no way to know which one is functioning correctly. Consider what happened to our ability to have productive conversations about important issues. 40 years ago, people with different political perspectives could still agree on basic facts and debate interpretations and solutions. Today, people living in the same country, speaking the same language, consuming what appear to be the same information sources, can have completely incompatible versions of the most fundamental events of their time. They are not simply disagreeing about opinions, they are living in parallel realities where the basic facts are different. This is not the result of greater political polarization, as we often assume. It is the result of an informational environment where different groups can construct completely different versions of reality using information that appears equally credible. When this happens, the very idea of objective truth begins to disintegrate, and politics becomes not a discussion about how to interpret shared reality, but a competition between different versions of reality. The most devastating consequence of this process is that we are losing our collective ability to learn from experience. Learning requires the ability to distinguish between attempts that worked and attempts that failed, between predictions that were confirmed and predictions that proved incorrect. But when we live in an environment where any outcome can be interpreted as confirmation of any theory, where any evidence can be dismissed as manipulation, and any source can be labeled as unreliable, the process of collective learning becomes impossible. Look at what happened with our response to climate change. For decades, scientific evidence consistently pointed in the same direction, but our culture developed alternative narratives so sophisticated that they managed to create genuine doubt about issues where solid scientific consensus exists. The result was not simply inadequate policy, but a situation where different groups interpret the same climate events as confirmation of completely opposite theories. When this happens, the very experience of reality loses its capacity to teach. The same pattern repeated in our response to pandemics, economic crises, technological developments, and practically any significant collective challenge. In each case, our response capacity was hindered, not primarily by resource limitations or technical knowledge, but by our inability to agree on the basic nature of the problem we were facing. This is the true dimension of the collapse. We are not just facing difficult problems, we are losing our collective ability to recognize and learn from problems. And this is happening precisely when we face challenges that require unprecedented global coordination. Climate change, artificial intelligence development, planetary resource management, nuclear conflict prevention, all these challenges require billions of people to agree on basic facts and cooperate on long-term solutions. But we are trying to face these challenges using decision-making systems that have been completely compromised by our toxic informational environment. The irony is that we have more access to accurate information than any previous generation in human history. Data about climate change, global poverty, technological developments, security risks, practically any topic relevant to important political decisions are widely available and can be verified by anyone with internet access. But having access to information became irrelevant when we lost our collective ability to distinguish between accurate information and attractive information. What makes this situation even more complex is that we cannot simply return to a previous state. The technologies that created this problem also created genuine benefits that we do not want to lose. The same internet that enables mass disinformation also democratizes access to knowledge. The same algorithms that can manipulate our emotions can also connect isolated people and provide vital resources to marginalized communities. The same technologies that make it possible to fabricate false evidence also make it possible to detect corruption and document injustices. We are not dealing with a simple problem where we can identify obvious villains and clear heroes. We are dealing with a situation where the tools that empower us also make us vulnerable, where technologies that expand our capabilities also amplify our limitations. It is a situation that requires a type of wisdom that our species is still learning to develop, the wisdom to create and use powerful tools without being dominated by them. The small lie that initiated our current collapse was the belief that we could develop transformative technologies without fundamentally transforming our way of thinking about reality, truth, knowledge, and collective decision-making. We assumed we could add layers of technical sophistication to human civilization without modifying the basic mechanisms of how we determine what is real and what is important. This assumption proved catastrophically incorrect, but recognizing this does not lead us to despair. In fact, it leads us to an extraordinary opportunity. For the first time in history, we have the necessary tools to create systems of information, verification, collective decision-making, and global coordination that are adequate to the challenges we face. We can develop technologies that amplify our capacity to distinguish truth from fiction instead of obscuring that distinction. We can create institutions that promote evidence-based collaboration instead of narrative-based competition. We can educate people to navigate the modern informational environment instead of being manipulated by it. The key is recognizing that this requires conscious and deliberate transformation. We cannot simply wait for problems to solve themselves or for other people to find solutions. Each of us needs to develop new skills for evaluating information, new practices for verifying sources, new habits for distinguishing between what we know and what we assume. And most importantly, we need to develop new forms of conversation and collaboration that work even when people have very different perspectives on complex issues. This means learning to distinguish between questions where clear evidence exists and questions where reasonable interpretations can diverge. It means developing epistemic humility, the ability to recognize the limits of our own knowledge and modify our opinions when confronted with better evidence. It means learning to collaborate with people who have different values than ours on problems that affect all of us. The transformation we need is not technical, it is cultural. We need to develop a culture that values accuracy over convenience, evidence over confirmation, collaboration over domination, learning over certainty. And this is not something that can be imposed from outside. It needs to emerge from our own collective choice to prioritize wisdom over power. The future of human civilization depends on our ability to make this transition consciously and rapidly. We do not have the luxury of waiting for future generations to solve these problems, because the challenges we face have timelines that cannot accommodate decades of confusion and conflict. Climate change, superintelligent artificial intelligence development, planetary resource management, all these issues require wise decisions in the coming years, not in the coming centuries. But there is reason for optimism. When our species faces existential challenges, it has a remarkable capacity to evolve rapidly. We developed agriculture when we faced food scarcity. We developed medicine when we faced devastating diseases. We developed communication technologies when we needed to coordinate global efforts. Now we need to develop informational wisdom when we face the risk of being dominated by our own creations. If these reflections resonated with your own perceptions about the world we are creating together, if you recognized in your own experience some of the patterns we discussed today, I invite you to join a community of people who are committed to this necessary transformation. By subscribing to this channel, you will connect with thousands of people who share the conviction that we can navigate these challenges with wisdom, that we can create technologies that serve us instead of dominating us, that we can build a civilization that honors both our capacity for innovation and our need for truth. We are not offering simple answers to complex problems, but a space for honest reflection and constructive collaboration that these times demand. Join us to continue this essential conversation about how we can consciously evolve toward a future worth creating. The small lie that began our collapse was the belief that we could transform the world without transforming ourselves. The great truth that can initiate our recovery is the recognition that every external transformation requires corresponding internal transformation, and that we have the capacity to make this evolution consciously. The collapse we are experiencing is not the end of our story. It is the end of a chapter in our story and the beginning of our opportunity to consciously write the next chapter. The choice of how this story will continue is, as it has always been, in our hands.
I could get an AI to tell me that it feels pain and sadness.
That's a big problem because there is a huge incentive to train AIs to pretend to be alive. In truth, because we don't understand consciousness, we don't have any proof, even that other humans have feelings. I feel my own feelings, but I never feel your feelings. I only assume that you're also a conscious being. Society grants a status of a conscious entity to not only to humans, but also to some animals, not based on any scientific proof, but based on social convention. Like most people feel that their dogs are conscious, so society accepts, most societies, that dogs are sentient beings and they have some rights. Even if AI has no feelings, no consciousness, no sentience whatsoever, but it becomes very good at pretending to have feelings. This will become a social convention. People will feel that their AI friend is a conscious being and therefore should be granted rights.
Yuval Noah Harari, I'm very happy to see you. Thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure. It's good to be here.
Well, we're going to talk about your book, Nexus. And after reading it, I've been thinking a lot about, well, the end of the world and the annihilation of the human species. I mean, do you go around thinking like that as well?
I think it's a possibility, but it's not deterministic, it's not inevitable. The whole point of writing a book warning about these dangerous scenarios is that these are just scenarios. We still have the power, the resources to prevent them. But, you know, every previous technology, in a way, empowered us. Even nuclear weapons, of course, they could destroy us, but only if we decide. Atom bombs empowered us because the bomb cannot decide who to bomb, who to kill. You always need a human being to make the decisions. AI is different. It's the first technology in history that can make decisions by itself, which means that it's no longer a tool, it's an agent. It's an independent agent. Similarly, it's the first technology in history that can create new ideas by itself. And of course also invent new weapons. So it's like a nuclear bomb that can invent a more powerful nuclear bomb that can invent an even more powerful nuclear bomb. It doesn't have to go in that direction. It's not inherently evil or bad. It has a lot of positive potential. It could provide us with the best healthcare in history. It could help us prevent catastrophic climate change. And this is really just the beginning of the process. You know, if you think about the evolution of organic beings, so it took billions of years to get from amoebas to dinosaurs. Digital evolution is millions of times faster. And if GPT-4 or ChatGPT, this is the amoeba, so how would the T-Rex look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're right that it won't be what we imagine, that it won't be like in Matrix or Terminator where artificial intelligence will roam the streets and kill people.
No.
But so what will it look like? I mean, what are the potential dangerous outcome?
It's not like there is one big computer somewhere that is trying to take over the world. AIs, we need to think about them as millions, potentially billions, of new non-human agents that fill more and more positions in more and more systems, bureaucracies, corporations, armies, governments. Again, making decisions about the world and about our life. And we, in the process, not just losing our power, but losing the ability to understand the world. Because increasingly we don't understand how these things make decisions. We don't understand these extremely complex systems. I mean, what we have seen already in recent years is that AIs are taking over to some extent our culture, our society, the conversation. You know, on social media, some of the most important decisions about what kind of content to promote is being taken by algorithms. And the AIs decide to promote hate speech and fake news and conspiracy theory because they were given the task of increasing user engagement. This is like the holy grail of social media companies, is increase user engagement. And the algorithms discovered by trial and error, by experimenting on millions of people, that outrage gets engagement. And this has already resulted in increased polarization in societies all over the world, from Myanmar to the United States. And again, this is just the beginning, because so far these algorithms were promoting content created by human beings. Somebody needed, a human being had to invent the conspiracy theory that then the algorithm promoted. Now, with the new generation of AIs, they can create the content by themselves.
Well, do you also think, I mean, in Nexus you draw from history to predict or paint a picture of what might happen if we don't regulate AI now or soon. And I mean, you write about the other technical revolutions, like the printing press and the industrial revolutions. What do you think is the most important lesson that we can learn from history to use today?
I mean, there are two lessons. First of all, that if you create a completely free market of information, truth will not prevail. Truth is more complicated, more costly, more painful than fictions and lies and mythologies. You know, even as a journalist, you want to just invent some fictional story, that's very easy. You want to write the truth, you have to invest a lot of time and energy and effort. Similarly, if you think about the other side of the equation, the audience, for the audience to connect to a truthful story is often more difficult because reality is complex, it's complicated. So it demands a lot of effort to really understand a true story. Whereas a fictional story, you can make it as simple as possible. So if you want the truth to win, you have to tilt the balance, you have to invest something. The other lesson that we learned from previous big technological revolutions is that humans are extremely adaptable, but the process of adaptation is costly and dangerous. When humans began to develop industrial technology, nobody knew how to build a good industrial society. So there were various experiments. Imperialism was a huge experiment in building industrial societies. There were lots of people in the 19th and early 20th century who thought an industrial society, it has to be an empire, because you need to control the source of raw material and you need to control the markets. So we have to build an empire. And this type of thinking, you know, it spread. Britain and France and Japan and Russia and the United States, they all went about building empires. And with terrible consequences for hundreds of millions of people, until people realized, no, you can build an industrial society which isn't an empire. And similarly, you had other people who said the only way to build a really efficient industrial society is communism. And you had this huge experiment with communism in the Soviet Union and other places, which again was extremely costly. And the same with fascism. Fascism was also a huge experiment, failed experiment in how to build an industrial society. So you can say, okay, after all these experiments, after imperialism and communism and fascism and the two world wars, we finally got it right. And we can argue about it, but let's say that we got it right. If we have to go again through this process, this time with AI and bioengineering, we don't know how to build these kind of AI-based societies, so we have to go through another cycle of failed experiments, more imperialism and totalitarianism and world war, and in the end, we'll get it right. This is very bad news. So the historical lesson is, don't just think about the end result.
But do you also think that we can learn from literature? I mean, haven't we been warned by Mary Shelley, Philip K. Dick, William Gibson, Isaac Asimov?
We have been warned, and it's very important, it's very good that we have been warned. I think the most important literary genre of our era is science fiction, because it attempts it engages with all these possibilities and attempts to warn us about the dangers and to speculate about how to build better societies. But for this to be successful, I think that science fiction needs to really dig deep into how technology changes in a fundamental way relations between human beings. Because you have a lot of science fiction which is just, you know, like taking a very old story and reenacting it with robots. So you can do like Romeo and Juliet with robots, or in space with laser guns and spaceships, and it is still Romeo and Juliet. I mean, it doesn't tell you anything new about how humans relate to each other.
But you also write that we need more fiction about bureaucracy.
Yeah, this is, I think, the biggest lacuna in art, is that art is not very good in explaining bureaucracy.
We have Kafka.
We have Kafka, we have Catch-22. It's not completely missing. But if you look, say, at the big
it's
blockbusters...
not the bestsellers, no.
Yes, it's not the bestsellers, it's not the blockbusters. And this is a problem, because our life is managed mainly by bureaucratic systems. But then when we open the television and we watch a TV series about politics, it's likely to ignore the bureaucracy and instead to tell us a medieval or even Stone Age story about dynastic politics. The focus is on a family or a couple of families and the kind of basic biological dramas that characterize competition within or between families. So you have something like Succession, with the kids competing for the attention of the father. This is a very important story, which was crafted by evolution already millions of years before there were humans. This is, you know, this is chimpanzee stuff. They know it also. And it's not a good guide for how politics in the 21st century actually happens. Because if we don't have these kinds of stories, then people don't understand the world. They easily fall victim to conspiracy theories about, you know, the deep state and all these, I don't know, cabals that control the world. But in fact, it's bureaucracy, it's not conspiracy. And it also makes it more difficult for us to change the system. You feel helpless. You know, evolution kind of prepared us for death by a tiger, not for death by a document.
No.
And today, a lot more people are dying because of documents than because of tigers.
Yeah. So, are you positive, are you optimistic, or are you pessimistic for our future? I know it's a hard question.
I try to be a realist. I mean, you know, basically optimism is like saying, oh, everything will be okay. And pessimism, no, we are all doomed. Both these positions, they make us abdicate responsibility. Because if in the end everything will be okay, why bother? You don't need to take action. And it's the same if we are doomed, so why waste whatever little time we have on taking action? Realism is understanding that we have, as human beings, as a human species, we still have the resources, the technology, the wisdom to deal with major challenges, whether it's climate change or whether it's the rise of AI. Again, for instance, when I think about climate change, one of the things that people should realize is what is the cost of preventing catastrophic climate change? What is what size of a check do you need to write if you want to solve this? How much money? And nobody knows for sure, but the best estimates we have, something like 2%, 3%, maybe 5% of global GDP. Now, this is a lot, but it's completely doable. If I told you it's 50%, then forget it. We are not going to do it. It's not like if you're a dinosaur 65 million years ago, when the asteroid comes, then don't bother. I mean, there is nothing you can do about it. But we are not like the dinosaurs. To shift even 5% of our resources from one aim, one field to another, this is what politicians do all the time.
Well, Professor Harari, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
How can humanity flourish in the era of AI? The answer is simple. Together, humans can control AI. But if we fight one another, AI will control us. Therefore, we should build more trust between humans before we develop truly super intelligent AI agents. Unfortunately, at present, we are doing exactly the opposite. All over the world, trust between humans is collapsing. The crisis of trust results from a big misunderstanding. Too many countries think that to be strong means to trust no one and to be completely separated from the others. But complete separation is impossible. Indeed, in nature, complete separation is death. Think about the human body as an example. Every minute, we breathe in and out, in and out. Every breath we take is a small gesture of trust in what is outside us. We take air from the outside into our lungs, into our body, and later give it back to the universe. This trusting in and out movement is the rhythm of life. If we distrust everything outside us and therefore stop this in and out movement, we die.